Okay, hi guys, this is Miss Margaret. I'm with the County of San Luis Obispo Public Library. This is part of our summer reading program, 2021 programs. This project is a program of the County of San Luis Obispo Public Libraries, supported in whole by the U.S. Institute of Museum and Library Services under the provisions of the Library Services and Technology Act, administered in California by the California State Librarian. We're so happy to have this grant funding, and we are very excited to be able to partner with the San Luis Obispo Children's Museum. And we have Miss Lexi here, who is going to be doing our program today. So I am going to turn you guys over to her.
Hi everyone, I'm Miss Lexi. I'm with the San Luis Obispo Children's Museum, and today we are going to be doing an experiment about cornstarch together. So what this experiment is going to show us is something about states of matter. So while we're going through the experiment, I want you to keep the states of matter in mind. There are three main states of matter: a solid, a liquid, and a gas. So a solid is anything that kind of stays the same roughly when you touch on it. So if you touch on your table, you press it, it'll stay the same. It'll kind of push back. A liquid is a substance that kind of flows. So you can kind of press right through it, and that'll also stay the same when you press it. It'll kind of keep flowing. And then a gas, which we're not going to be learning so much about in this experiment today, is like the air. You can't grasp onto it or hold it like you can with a solid, and it's a little more diffuse. So just keep that in mind, and we're going to learn a little bit more about the states of matter as we go along in the experiment. So before we get started, I wanted to walk through our ingredients for today. If you picked up the box, you'll already have the ingredients, but if not, you can go ahead and grab these from your kitchen. So I'll let you guys see my work service, give you a little bit of a better view, make sure everything is in there. So the main ingredient today that we're going to be using is cornstarch. So if you don't have this from the box, it's probably in your kitchen. Most kitchens have it. It's pretty common for cooking. So that's your cornstarch. You're going to need a little cup of water. We're going to mix with the cornstarch today. And then you're going to need some googly eyes. You can see in there. And some food coloring. So there should be this little tablet that you got in the box. You're also going to need a small container. So if you did get the box, you should have a little one that you got in there. If not, you can just use a cup or a small bowl. I'm going to be using a little bit of a bigger bowl today, so you guys can all see my cornstarch creature. Okay, so the very first thing we're going to do is take our food coloring tablet and put it in a little bit of water. So what this is going to do is allow the tablet to dissolve, and as you can see, it's bubbling up. That's because CO2 is releasing from the tablet, and it's going to dissolve it, and so we're going to get a nice dye. And what this dye is going to do is make our cornstarch creatures colorful. It's not going to help with any of the science per se, it's just going to make it a little bit prettier. So go ahead and set your food coloring to the side, and we're just going to let that continue to dissolve while we start the experiment. So go ahead and open up your cornstarch. Have it in there. See, it's a nice fine white powder. So we're just going to pour a little bit of the cornstarch into the bowl. And this is going to get messy, so be ready to make a mess. Just do a little bit more than that. Okay. Before we start adding the water, I just want to take a moment so we can observe the properties of the cornstarch. When you're learning about science, it's really, really important to stop and feel things out, make some observations so you can tell what reactions are happening and what's actually taking place. So we're going to do that right now with the cornstarch. So go ahead and get your hands in it. You can feel it. It's kind of squishy. So cornstarch is a very, very fine powder, and it's actually made out of corn. So the parts of it get separated, and only one part of the kernel is taken, dried, and ground up into this fine powder. So if you've seen cornstarch in your kitchen before, it might be because It was used in cooking. So cornstarch is used to make things thicker, like sauces, gravies, stuff like that. So one of the things that's really special about cornstarch is that it's a very, very fine powder. It's a lot more fine than most other powders. So imagine in your head a grain of sand. They're really tiny, right? So a grain of cornstarch is actually 100 times smaller than a grain of sand. So you can feel how silky it is, and that's why, because the grains are so tiny. So one thing I want us to do is take a little bit of the cornstarch in our hand, and I want you to kind of give it a squeeze. Try not to make as much of a mess as I did, but give it a squeeze. See how it kind of tenses up a little bit. You can press it. If you press it harder, it's kind of the same as if you press it softer. It reacts the same way to force. So this is because the cornstarch is a solid. And I just want you to remember how the cornstarch acted when we pressed on it. So the next thing we're going to focus on is the water. So take your small container of water. It can be a little cup or a bowl. And the first thing I want to do is the same thing that we just did with the cornstarch. Go ahead and stick your finger in it and kind of feel the water. And I want you to try pressing on it hard with a kind of a lot of force. You can just kind of poke your finger in there and then try pressing on it softly. And as you'll notice, the water is the same. It reacts the same way if you press it really hard and if you press it really soft. And that's because the water is a liquid. So the water will just kind of slide right off your finger either way. It doesn't change. And that's going to be a little different when we put these all together. So what we're going to do is pour some of this water right into the cornstarch. And this is where things get really messy, so get ready. You can pour a little in, mix it up with your hand, and it's going to feel really goopy. We're trying to get this to the texture of a pancake batter. If any of you have ever made pancakes, you'll know what I mean, where it's a little thick and a little gooey. So I'm going to use a little bit more cornstarch. Mine's a little too thin. So if you need to add more cornstarch or more water, you can go ahead and do that. Just play around with it a little bit until you get the right consistency. And if you have enough cornstarch, you can probably feel how weird it is already. It gets kind of hard and then it gets kind of liquidy. I'm going to add a tiny bit more water into mine. It's a little bit less thick. Okay, just play around with it until you get it to the right consistency. And then we're going to take our food coloring off from the side and just pour in a couple drops into the cornstarch. Mine's going to be pink today. I'm excited to see what colors you guys go for. Okay, mix it all up. I'm going to add a tiny bit more cornstarch. Okay, add a little bit more color, so mine's nice and pink. Yeah, there we go. So the first thing I want you to do with your cornstarch is go ahead and just pick it up with your hand. And as you can see, it just kind of flows off. If you can feel it a little bit and grab it, it gets really goopy and it kind of sticks. But when you just hold out your palm, it just flows right off of it. Okay, so now I want you to take some in your palm, but then squeeze it. You can see it crunches up and then it totally loosens and falls off. Next, take your hand and just move it really slowly through the liquid. Maybe you can feel some on the bottom, kind of crunched up, but for the most part, your finger just kind of flows through. Now I take your finger and do the same thing, but just do it faster. And as you can see, it really thickens up and it's really hard to move your finger back and forth. So the mixture behaves totally differently when you move your hand slowly versus when you move it fast. Now try poking it. Poke it just a little, and it kind of attaches to your finger, and then poke it really hard. Yeah, go ahead and just play around with your cornstarch and see how it reacts to your touch. And if you want to make it funnier, you can add some Google eyes in there. I'm going to give mine a bunch of eyes like a spider. Whoops, lost an eye. There you have your own little monster. So keep playing around with it and see what it does. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the science behind why this happens. So like we talked about earlier, there are three main states of matter: a solid, a liquid, and a gas. We started out with one solid, which was the cornstarch, and we saw how that behaved. When we poked it fast, when we poked it hard, it behaved the same way. And we started out with a liquid, which was the water, and that behaved the same way when we poked it too. So what happens when you put these two together is they don't behave the way they're supposed to. It's made up of a solid and a liquid, but it doesn't act like either one. And that's because cornstarch creatures are what's called a non-Newtonian liquid. Now that's a really fancy name, but all it means is that it doesn't follow Sir Isaac Newton's laws about how the states of matter are supposed to behave. So if you've heard about Sir Isaac Newton before, he is a famous scientist who discovered gravity and also a lot about how things in our universe work. So this is a non-Newtonian liquid, and that means it doesn't follow the rules of a liquid and it doesn't follow the rules of a solid. And that happens because cornstarch and water is what's called a suspension. So when you mix these two together, they don't really fully incorporate and become one thing. The cornstarch particles are so fine that they stay suspended in the water. And that's why it behaves in this weird way. So when you press it slowly, it acts kind of like a liquid. It kind of slides off your finger in a similar way, and it feels a little bit similar to how the water felt. And that's because the molecules are staying relaxed when you touch them softly. They're not tensing up, so you don't get that resistance like you get with a solid. But when you poke it hard, all the molecules tighten up and they behave more like a solid. So that variation in force causes it to change between the properties of a solid and a liquid. So you get the smooth slidiness of the water, and you also get the tenseness, that hardness that you get with a solid. If you poke the table and if you poke the cornstarch, it kind of feels similar at first until you pause and you give the molecules a second to relax. So there you have it. That's what makes a cornstarch creature so weird. I hope you're having fun playing with yours. Mine is a silly little monster guy. If you can see his little eyes in there, he looks like a little bug living in a pond.